It's just terrible that this type of thing's going on in America, especially with judges. But of course it is, right? Of course it is. Welcome back. Be sure to subscribe. Let's get right to it. First topic. So Trump, his cabinet, and President Bukele of El Salvador completely destroyed CNN and this fake news narrative of the father who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. It's a great clip. Take a look at it.
I support it. Go ahead. Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CNN. Low-rated. Which one is that?
The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Well, let me ask Pam. Would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So will you return him?
And you are doing a great job. Thank you, Pam. Stephen Miller, wait a minute. Could you just also respond to that question? Because, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan
But
to
the
ask
Supreme
for
Court is
him to get
asking
it back?
to.
And what was the ruling in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it for the court can only be directed to him.
I asked
¿Usted lo
President
liberaría,
Bukele.
Presidente Bukele?
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to be not suggesting that I'll smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's
I mean,
always
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you could release him inside El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm not releasing. I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into our
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on your correspondence just a few days ago.
How long do we have to answer this question from you? Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically all the fake news media is doing these days is just looking for any little thing that could be considered a... Yeah, so basically all the fake news media is doing these days is just looking for any little thing that Trump might have made a mistake with that they... Yeah, so basically all the fake news media is doing these days is looking for any little thing that they could just say, oh, look at Trump made a mistake here, when it's not even real. You know, this whole, oh my God, it was his father who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. No, you just got the whole story, right? You got the whole thing there. It's not a father who was mistaken. This guy was an MS-13 gang member, and he's just basically a part of a terrorist group, right? They've been labeled a terrorist group, and now, you know, any member of that gang can just be deported as long as they're not a citizen and just get the fuck out, right? You know, because it's just sickening that that's all they want to do is just, they don't even care what the situation is. They don't even care if it's a gang member. They just hear that a father was deported to El Salvador, and it's like, oh my God. And then some judge rules that they got to return him. That's a total fake news judge. And then this is just the story for a good month or so of, oh my God, when are you going to return this father, this, you know, father of the year? No, dude, we're not returning a criminal gang member. And thank God that President Bukele is just like, yeah, no, we're not going to be smuggling a terrorist into America. All right. It's crazy that this is what the fake news media has just been reduced to. Just trying to perpetuate a lie for basically almost months now, right? But all right, let's get to the next topic. So CNN has to clear the air about them hating America after Trump made some comments. Go ahead, take a look at the clips.
And we appreciate it. Thanks.
Actually, what you're doing with the border is remarkable. It has dropped, 95%? It's incredible.
As of this morning, 99%, 99.1% to be exact.
Why are those numbers not in the media?
Well, they get out with the fake news, you know, like CNN over here doesn't want to put them out because they don't like putting out good numbers. They only like putting out, because I think they hate our country, actually.
Yeah,
but it's a shame. You're right. Isn't that a great question? Why doesn't the media? Why don't they put out numbers?
Yeah, 99%. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Definitely focus on a lot of some misinformation as well, but we want to digest all of this right now with our terrific panel here and our reporters. Jeff Zeleny, I want to start with you. You are at the White House. Before I get to you, I just want to say, for the record, since we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office that CNN hates our country. CNN does not hate our country. That should go without saying. I've been here for 32 years, and I see a rhetorical device in him trying to say such a thing. That said, I want to focus on the news that we heard. and the news came out in...
Yeah, we all know that CNN hates America because it's all they really ever do is put out stories that are trying to hate on America, you know, and just do anything they possibly can to make America look bad or make Trump look bad, obviously. And Trump represents America now, so anything they can do, anytime they try to make Trump look bad, it's basically just trying to reflect bad on America. And it's so funny since Trump has the mandate of the people, you know, popular vote. They hate when you say popular vote. It's just so hilarious how they just keep doing it, though. They don't know how to pivot and be like, all right, why don't we just start calling it like it is down, you know, just calling it like it actually is. But, you know, for some reason, they think their total failing audience, their audience that's just completely disintegrating. Nobody watches CNN. All their ratings are terrible. But they think that, like, feeding into this audience that really doesn't even exist might be about 20% of America. They keep feeding into it like they're going to just get some sort of credibility back or something. Like, what's the plan there? You know, you're hemorrhaging viewership, yet you keep doubling and tripling down on everything. It's like, you do hate America, CNN. And it's blatantly obvious that you hate America. And if you got to go on a broadcast and be like, no, we don't hate America, that's basically admitting that you do, because you know that people realize, oh yeah, everybody thinks we hate America, so we better go on in there and tell them we don't hate America. But all right, let's get to the next topic. So a judge in Frisco, Texas lowered that Karmelo Anthony murderer kid's bond to $250,000 from $1 million. And of course, it's, you know, a black judge who basically only sees race. You know, what's so terrible about situations like this, or first of all, the kid's a cold-blooded murderer, right? I mean, he stabbed the kid right in the heart and over a seat, right? Like, he's like, hey, you know, you can't be in this seat, you know, this isn't your area. And then boom, you get stabbed in the heart and you die. That's what people are dying over these days. But in situations like this, where you get a judge where, you know, Lady Justice is blind, right? Lady Justice is blind for a reason. So she doesn't see race or, you know, religion or anything, you know, gender, sex, whatever you want to say. Lady Justice is blind, so she just looks at the facts. And when you get judges like this who are obviously only seeing race, right? This is one of those, oh, well, he's black and, you know, this is an injustice type thing. This is one of those injustices, right? People like this, these types of judges need to be removed immediately from the judicial system so they can no longer just make it about what they feel or their race or, you know, their feelings, basically. This is my feelings, you know, this kid he was unjustly criticized by the internet. Yeah, that's exactly what that is. He was unjustly criticized by the internet in this judge's eyes. So she reduced the bond to $250K so the kid can get out and basically be on house arrest. It's just insane. You don't really have a country when you don't have a real judicial system like this, and judges are just completely bought and sold into some sort of fake news, race relations narrative, you know. It's just terrible that this type of thing's going on in America, especially with judges. But of course it is, right? Of course it is. But all right, let's get to the next topic. So the all-female crew of the Blue Origin space flight apparently went to space. Here's a clip.
Parachutes deploy from the crew capsule. Those are like the guide parachutes. There go the drogue parachutes.
Just free-falling right there until those drogues came out.
And then next will be the main parachutes that get pulled out.
Hear that screaming inside the capsule?
And all three air cushion that will kick up the dust. It's a very soft landing despite the sporty perception. There it is.
Congratulations and welcome back to Earth.
So was anybody really believing that they actually went to space? They're claiming they went to space for 10 minutes. Frankly, it was probably a whole green screen situation. It was probably filmed like last week, you know, all these clips of them doing everything. But yeah, it's just too hilarious. So it was basically a Bezos, you know, I'm doing this for my woman, Lauren Sanchez, you know, and it's going to be about women's power and how great women are. And I'm sure all of those women on those planes, or who did this thing, you know, they don't really care about women. They'll tell you that men should be able to compete in women's sports, and, you know, like, the women, they're not really fighting for women. They want to pretend like they are, oh, women's empowerment, but when it really comes down to it, they won't step up and say, no, men shouldn't be competing in women's sports. But yeah, it's just too fake and just too forced, you know what I'm saying? You have, you know, Lauren Sanchez playing the role of the boss babe, you got Katy Perry playing the role of the dreamer, and you got Gayle King as like kind of the skeptic who's a little scared, you know? It's just so funny that this type of thing's even happening. But let me know if you think it was even real. I'm still not convinced that it actually happened, you know? But all right, that's it for today. Be sure to like, subscribe, and we'll be seeing you